Another problem with what Governor Gavin Newsom says is when he talks about elections. Okay, and his perspective on elections is this insane thought that Trump is going to somehow steal 2028 or 2026 and do all sorts of nefarious things with the election. This is a dumb trope leveled against Trump himself and Republicans at large that just serves to enrage their base and get their base out to vote and disincentivize Republicans from getting out to vote because that if you get the point across, if people actually believe that your side is actually the tyrant, are you going to actually go out and vote for that person? So that's another part of the emphasis, and it's so stupid. I'm sorry. It is the most ridiculous thing to suggest that Republicans are somehow going to steal 2026 or 2028. Now, let's talk about redistricting and gerrymandering. Okay, I hate gerrymandering. Most actual normal voters hate gerrymandering. A lot of politicians love gerrymandering. Why? Because it makes a lot of their seats safer. It locks in sometimes political power for one party or another, and both sides use it. Okay, I hate it. I think that races for the House of Representatives should be among the most competitive. Okay, you can't gerrymander the Senate because each senator is elected by the whole entire state twice every 6 years, or yes, twice every 6 years. Okay, I think I got that wrong. I think it is twice every 6 years. Anyway, they have two senators each for 6 year terms. I might be being stupid on the math, but anyway, that's beside the point. You can't gerrymander Senate elections. Um, but gerrymandering is certainly a problem. Here's a problem with the so called solutions to that. Now, California, now prior to Prop 50, I think it was Prop 50, which relegated this to uh, uh, the next redistricting cycle so that they could take advantage, it superseded a constitutional amendment so that they could counter Texas. So they're complaining in California, and Democrats at large are complaining about Texas redistricting. Now, get this, right? These are actual numbers for you. California has one of the most gerrymandered congressional district maps in the country, along with places like Massachusetts. Okay. Currently, the state has 82%, 82% Democrat representation in their House delegation. I believe it is 43 Democrats to 9 Republicans. Okay. Now, Texas, with a projected gain of 5 Republican seats as a result of their redistricting, will only have a 78% Republican representation. That's 4% lower gerrymandering before California even redistricts. And that is under a system in California that is supposedly independent. These independent commissions that are meant to design districts uh, that don't factor in the political, the partisan makeup of the district or the area and the state and whatever. So, I mean, my point is, yes, if you're going to complain about gerrymandering, then complain about both sides and recognize that the so-called independent commissions are a complete failure, and recognize that any process by which you try and eliminate the partisan contentions within redistricting, as the Virginia Redistricting Commission proves, is going to be very complicated and oftentimes end in deadlock. Because the way it was done and the way it's supposed to be done in Virginia as of right now is that there's supposed to be equal number Republicans and equal number Democrats on a commission to generate maps, and they have to come to a consensus on these maps. the first time this was done, it ended up deadlocking and it went to the Virginia State Supreme Court. And they had two individuals, one Republican, one Democrat, map maker, come together and come up with some map that is now in use. Okay. The process of redistricting is, on one hand, probably a lot easier today because of the software, the computing power, and the data that we have on populations than it was before. And on the other hand, more difficult because of the even further entrenched partisan interests and the dichotomy between the two parties at this point. Um, which I'll probably get to somewhere in this podcast, but the dichotomy is completely the fault of the radical left. Um, so, my suggestion about a solution is to conduct redistricting with a geographic basis point, right? Let's say you take a city as the basis point and expand a circle such that the area encompassed is a clear geometric shape, a square, a circle in this case, right? That encompasses uh, as much of the um, integrity of different towns and different communities as possible, because like if you split a district on a road that runs through a single town and one side of the town is in this district, the other side of this town is in another district, I don't generally like that. So on the margins of that, yeah, it's going to look a little bit weird, just so that every town or community is included in the same district, right? Such that you can expand the circle to the point where, okay, now we have, what is it, 750,000 residents. That's one congressional district. And then you geometrically divide the state into shapes that make sense, so that, okay, let's say we have a rectangular state, let's say Alabama, and I forget how many representatives are in Alabama, but let's just say five, right? So we got this circle in Birmingham or whatever, and okay, we expand that so that we have 750 something thousand, and then you take one side of that one corner of that state and expand it out so that you have, okay, there, and then we got the 750,000 residents. Okay, that's another district, and then expand down from there, or whatever the case, so that it's done geometrically rather than simply by partisan garbage, because this is a problem for Republicans. It hurts Republicans in some states, it hurts Democrats in other states, and it really does seem to be a violation of at least the spirit of democracy, even though this has been going on since the inception of this country. We've always had this problem, okay? But we have the computer tools nowadays to the computing power to really do this in a more straightforward manner. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with my proposal is it will never get passed. It'll never get passed because the politicians out there like the system as it is, because, I mean, if they get elected, they have an easier way to stay in power, whether that's a Republican, whether that's a Democrat, it doesn't matter. And uh, I do think this is an issue that uh, everyone can come to a consensus on, that we should do it a different way, and that these independent commissions clearly don't work. Having a system where each side is equally represented doesn't really work, because they're just going to deadlock. So there has to be a different way to come to a conclusion, and maybe a a system that is devoid of any sort of political motivation, because these independent commissioners in states like California clearly have a political motivation. Otherwise, it wouldn't be, was it 82%, sorry, yeah, 82% Democrat in a state where it's about 60-40 Democrat, right? Or 78% Republican in a state that's like 55-45 Republican, right? Um, and by the way, after the gerrymandering, redistricting in Texas. So, this is an issue that I think a lot of people could come to a consensus on, but generally don't, and the politicians will never accept it. There's ways to enforce it on the politicians if you can, go through uh, the process for amending the Constitution that is rarely, if ever, used. That's the Convention of States um, method, which completely eliminates the role of the federal government, the federal legislature, the Senate and the House. It can be done completely through the states. I would like to see that process happen. It is very unlikely it ever will, and we'll continue to deal with this forever until such time as some politicians actually come around and say enough is enough. We need to fix this, and we need to fix it because everyone is being harmed by it. Now, going back to the interview, Shapiro accuses Newsom of being implicitly disingenuous, particularly when it relates to Newsom's use of social media to counter some of the social media postings of President Trump. And Shapiro kind of makes the point that the support Newsom supporters generally take him seriously when he posts responses to Donald Trump's social media posts, Truth Social, uh, whereas people are more likely to not take Trump so seriously whenever he's posting to social media. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there between, the level of seriousness. Even though um, Newsom is not necessarily being so serious when he's just trolling President Trump. Uh, you know, I think Newsom is a disingenuous politician. I don't think his social media postings really factor heavily into that characterization of him. It's more along the lines of him doing and saying things as governor of California and then having this podcast, having this interview with Ben Shapiro, and trying to come across as this easygoing, moderate kind of politician that is saying, "Well, I had to deal with a radical left legislature in California, and I vetoed some bills from the legislature. So look at me, I'm so moderate." I don't think that works. I think a lot of people are unfortunately going to fall for it. A lot of independents are probably going to fall for it. And if I have anything to say about it, maybe you'll think twice before you do. We still have 2 years before the, yeah, 2+ years before the presidential election. And so hopefully my voice is larger then than it is now. But I would like people to actually get away from just blindly believing a politician, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, whether they agree with you or you agree with them or otherwise. Okay, we need to get away from this nonsense. Now, to close out this section, I want to come back to a serious issue, and that is the claim that Trump is trying to have some influence over the elections that's nefarious. Okay, I don't even know what Newsom really means when he suggests that Donald Trump is going to try and steal the election, whether that's 2026 or 2028. Like I said, the redistricting, the gerrymandering problem is a problem, but it's not a problem solely of the right or the left. It has been used by both, and in some states, it is still, and these typically are Democrat states, it is worse now than the Republican states will be after gerrymandering. Okay. Um, so I think it's a significant problem to suggest that something so nefarious as stealing an election is occurring when you have no evidence to support this and are using it just to gin up opposition and support your own support and opposition to the other party. Now, I know some of you are probably going to think about, oh, what do you think about 2020 and the narrative around 2020 that Trump has continued to push? And here's the deal: on 2020, there was no investigation, despite 500 plus affidavits being signed that people had seen irregular activity, seen fraud. I personally know of someone that told me specifically that they know they saw fraud. anecdotal evidence. I'm not saying that was widespread, but the problem for me about 2020 was all of this was characterized by the mainstream media as just a conspiracy theory. Okay, just a conspiracy theory, that there was no truth, that it's a lie. Okay, you can't say that without having any real investigation into this. And for what it's worth, Arizona did do an audit of Maricopa County, and as far as I remember, I'd have to go back through this, there were tens of thousands of out of county ballots that were submitted to the Maricopa County, the largest county in Arizona, in the 2020 election. And while you can't determine, because of the separation of the ballot from the address, the sender, the everything else, because it's supposed to be a secret ballot. Because of that, you're really unable to determine whether it's fraud or not. So I would say to that end, while 2020 can't be relitigated and we can't go back and determine whether tens of thousands of votes were fraudulent and did flip the election, we can't go back and determine that at this point. And I don't feel like we should be dwelling on that. And yes, that's advice to President Trump. Stop dwelling on 2020 because it's over and done with. You're already in your second term. You won. And when your term is up, you're back to private life and hopefully making the billions of dollars that you forewent being president. But anyway, here's the issue. There are things that can be done to secure the elections so that we don't have these accusations of electoral fraud, either way you go. Okay? And that is voter ID and reducing the amount of mail in ballots. Now, Europeans back in the early 2000s and Democrats maybe a decade later all warned about the possibility of mail-in ballots being ripe for fraud. We all knew this before 2020, and somehow we all forgot it. And by we all, I mean, you know, the politicians out there, politically minded individuals, whatever. Uh, but we all recognize this, and then we all forgot it conveniently when it would help Democrats beat Trump in 2020. There clearly was, to some extent, a reason to uh, have certain policies back in 2020, back during the COVID pandemic, that would aid people in getting out to vote at a time where a lot of people were afraid to get out. Because as we can remember, the announcement of a vaccine only came out, I believe, the week after the election, even though they knew they had come up with a vaccine prior to the election, which is another issue entirely. Uh, but the mail-in balloting process is so ripe for fraud, and the way some states do it is just automatically sending out a ballot to an address on file for an individual. And we already know that these voter rolls are not well maintained either. Okay, so a three-step process. Now, in-person voting is probably the most secure. There is a question, there still remains a question about the connection to the internet of some balloting systems that leaves them open to the potential for being hacked. Not that there was evidence per se to suggest that they were hacked, but being connected to the internet certainly opens up, and every cybersecurity expert who deals with elections recognizes that fact. I actually read an article on MSNBC, of all places, citing election security experts about this fact, about connection to the internet being making election machines susceptible to hacking. Okay, so that should end permanently and across the board, right? Excuse me. Um, Voter ID, having a photo identification with you in order to vote is much much more superior, much better a method than signature verification. Because who's doing the signature verification? People that clearly do not have any expertise in comparing signatures. Right? Those poll workers are volunteers. They're not signature experts. They look at it, that signature could be completely different. Your signature could be completely different from the one on file, and for maybe a legitimate reason, and they're just going to pass you by. All right. There's no real security in signature verification. Um, and even with computer systems that may attempt to do signature verification, there can be false positives, there can be false negatives. It's so much better to have a photo identification to in order to vote. The problem the left has with photo identification is it's somehow disenfranchising low income individuals, and they love to make the claim that it's disenfranchising minorities, which, if you logically extend that, you're suggesting that minorities are always low income people, which suggests to me some level of racism in that notion. If you claim that black people can't get a photo identification because they're poor, then you're a racist because not every black person is poor. That's an idiotic thing to say. It's an utterly stupid thing to say. Furthermore, you can get a photo identification from the state for either no or very small cost. I think in Virginia it's $2 to get a state ID, $2 per year. Give me a freaking break. You can panhandle for $2 and get a photo identification. Give me a break. Someone will probably just give it to you, the $2. Okay. And I think in some states it's free. Like, how ridiculous is it to say that it's financially or uh, prohibitive to get a state ID? It's not. It's a lie. It's stupid, and it's just used to make an argument that is fallacious on its face. And the argument is that Republicans hate minorities. Bullcrap. The argument is that Republicans want to prevent black people and Hispanics from voting. Bullcrap. Okay, that's all bullcrap. It's a lie, and unfortunately, people actually believe it. And the people that believe it are not doing our democracy any good. You believe lies and vote based on the lies that you believe. I'm sorry, you're not doing our democracy any good. Okay, and this goes along with what I've been saying about Newsom. You know, even as he tries to come across as this moderate, he says some wacky things that, like, Trump is going to steal 2026, or Republicans are going to steal 2026 or 2028, or that Trump wants to run for a third term. Yeah, that's a joke, and that's clearly a joke. And I don't even think Trump really started that notion. I think it was some other people, whether it was supporters on social media or some people in his orbit, maybe, that were making this nonsensical claim about him running for a third term. Hey, give me a break. It's more of a joke than anything else. And taking it seriously makes you look like a fool. Okay, that's just the truth. It makes you look like a fool to take things like this seriously. I don't mean to insult anyone, but sometimes you just got to be honest, right?